Hey guys, big news in the student loan world today. The saga continues here, so excited to break down this new news that just came out about the income-driven repayment plan extension of when you need to report your income. They also released some other stuff that is going to be important to know about if you have student loans. So, but before we dive in, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Michael Foley. I'm a certified financial planner and student loan professional, and I'm also the son of two doctors. And so let's dive in. So today, let's start with talking about what the new extension is and what are the rules that they have fabricated here. It's always fun to see what they come out with, and let's break down what they released, and then some of the implications, and then also how to find what your recertification date is as well at the end. Okay, so what did they release? So before we talk about what we released, let's look at what are the actual rules for any sort of income-driven repayment plan. So typically when you're on an income-driven repayment plan, and remind you, this is not based off of the size of the loans, it's strictly based off your income and your household size. And so typically when you're on an income-driven repayment plan, you have to recertify your income and show them how much money you're making every 12 months. But because of COVID, that's totally gone out the window, right? So nobody's had to recertify their income for the past 3+ years. And then what they said is, as the loans were about to turn back on, towards the end of 2023, like September is when they were going to be turning back on. Everyone was freaking out because they're saying, do we have to report our income right when the loans turn back on? And the loan servicers are freaking out because they're like, we can't process all of these applications right away. And so what they did is they gave everybody a 6-month buffer. And so they said if anybody is due to report their income within 6 months of after the loans turn back on after COVID, we're actually going to push you out a whole nother year. So for example, if your recertification date was in December of 2023, that has gotten pushed out to December of 2024, right? But now the end of that 6 months was March 1st. So that has since just passed. And so what they're saying now is that now, instead of March 1st being that, now it's going to be late September is what they're saying. So that's what they're, essentially saying, that nobody's going to have to report their income. The earliest somebody's going to have to report their income is going to be in late September now. So that kind of changes the game a little bit. But before we go into different strategies on that, let's finish what else they talked about, because they also addressed people. We were going through a lot with our clients that had their recertification dates were actually in January or February listed on their accounts, but their loan servicers were reaching out to them and forcing them to recertify early, even though that's totally against the federal guidelines that just came out. And they said that if it was before March 1st, we're going to push you out by a year. So the loan servicers and the Department of Ed were not in harmony on that. And so it was quite frustrating. So, we were submitting a lot of complaints to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, trying to push back on this. And hopefully, I think that hopefully it was a catalyst to help have them push this out too, because they realized that there was a problem. But essentially what we have to be looking at now is, a lot of these people have already recertified their income because we were backed into a corner and they forced us to recertify under threat of kicking people off of plans and things like that. And so they addressed that in this new update, and they said essentially they want this to be a no harm situation. So if you didn't recertify on time and they did boot you out, they're going to allow you to go back onto the plan. They're going to put you back in as if nothing happened, which is awesome. Now, if you recertified an income, and most of our clients going through income transitions, did have to report a higher income, therefore their payment went up since 3 years ago was their last income in their system. That was hurtful for them. So some clients maybe went from a $0 payment to a several $1,000 payment. Well, now they're actually going to retroactively, and they're going to kick you back down to whatever your lower payment was before you had to recertify this, which is crazy to think about. They're just making up rules here, but that's incredibly helpful for a lot of our clients. So love to hear that even if they did back you into a corner and they forced you to recertify your income, they're actually going to allow you to retroactively get that put back to whatever you were at. And then also, if you recertified early or you recertified here and your payment actually did go down, instead of going up, it went down. Not a lot of situations where that's going to happen, but if it did go down, they're going to leave it. They're not going to have that leave you at the higher payment or take you back to the higher payment. So how they're actually going to facilitate all this, we are very interested to see, because what tends to happen is the Department of Ed comes out with these crazy new ideas that Congress, develops, and they, or maybe this is, the current administration, puts this out. They release it to the public, but then they don't give any guidelines to the loan servicers on how to actually implement these things. So very curious to see how this plays out. So if you're in the camp of, now you have a higher payment that's due next month, do you pay it or not? I would pay it just because we're not actually sure how this is all gonna play out. So very curious to see how that's gonna be out. So that's kind of the new update there. Now the other update that they've come out with is they've actually given strict guidelines as to whenever your recertification date is. Now they have guidelines as to when you actually need, that's kind of the end date, but now you have to, they've given guidelines as to when you have to actually show income or give documentation to your loan servicer. So essentially what they've given is there's 3 dates now. So let's say, so the first date is 3 months prior to your recertification date is when you're due to show them your income again. 3 months out, the loan servicer is going to send you an email now and say, hey, it's time to recertify. But technically, you don't have to do anything until the next deadline, which is 35 days prior. So if you don't get your income reported to the loan servicer prior to 35 days before your recertification date, then they're saying that your calculation may not be done in time and you might not have a correct payment that comes in. So that's really important for going for forgiveness plans or other things like that. That could be a ineligible payment if we don't get that 35 days. So that's kind of the big one in my mind here. But then there's also the 10-day before deadline. So now that essentially 10 days before your recertification date, if you don't give them your income, that's when they actually do take action. So they will boot you off the plan, they'll send you to a standard 10-year repayment, increase your payment, they'll do all the things, whatever the consequences of you not recertifying your income on time. So that would be what they're doing. So why they don't just make that your actual recertification date, I have no idea, but that's just the new rules. So in our minds, we want to really think about that 35-day rule is essentially whenever your recertification date is. So if your recertification date's, December 31st, we'll want to backtrack, 35 days. So end of November is when we're going to have to, look at recertifying. Okay. So now, if what are some of our observations? There's a lot that is still unclear in this situation, and so we really want to be thoughtful as to, what is this telling us, and then what is this not telling us, right? So the new update doesn't tell us that they're going to push out everybody's recertification date if it's between now and September, right? Or now and November, as we'll talk about. So, but I think it's a pretty fair assumption to assume that they're going to follow the same guidelines that they did with the prior extension for COVID, that 6-month one that we talked about. They said anybody that falls between now and March, they're going to push out your recertification date by 1 year. They didn't say that in the update, but I think the general consensus is that is going to be the assumption, but I wouldn't count on it just yet. So if you're essentially thinking about filing an extension to maybe report a lower income or things like that, I would still probably file those extensions just as an insurance policy in case this fabrication that our administration has come up with doesn't play out as seamlessly on the loan servicer front. Okay, so that's just something to think about. But the other thing is, where's that deadline? They said that it's being extended to late September at the earliest, right? So, but if we're following these new guidelines, that means that maybe is that the 35-day rule essentially? So if we backtrack in the example that they gave us, essentially said like if you have a November 1st recertification date, then you would have to get them your income 35 days prior, which would be late September, right? So now we're saying, well, what if you have an October recertification date? Does that mean you're getting booted out by a year? We don't know, right? And so these are some of the questions that we're going to have to ask. But other than that, I think it's very positive for almost all borrowers here. But we just got to go back to, thinking, okay, when we do have to recertify your income, let's make sure that we're reporting the lowest possible income. Okay, so we got to be very cognizant of that. So whatever strategies we might be looking at for our clients with tax extensions, filing separately or jointly, all those things, I would still be very cautious of before just totally ruling out our 2023 taxes. So big things to be thinking about. We'll probably continue learning more. Hopefully they'll put out a frequently asked questions or something like that. That'll help give us some more clarity on that. We'll also see how the loan servicers actually adopt these rules in the coming months here. But hopefully this is helpful to just give you an idea of what is being updated, what's happening, and then we'll continue to keep you posted as we learn more or develop new strategies for this stuff. So thanks again for hopping on, and we're hopefully this has been helpful to continue helping you be more intentional in your finances and hopefully inspire you to live more humble and quiet lives. So thanks so much for joining. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.